Without further ado, I do want to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Jennifer Stormer-Galley is Professor and Senior Associate Dean for Academic and Faculty Affairs at the iSchool. She is truly a social media expert. We have the absolute perfect person with us today to talk to us about this topic. So thank you so much for being with us. And with that, I will pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Amanda. I appreciate the invitation and the chance to talk with you. So this is a networking event. If we were in person, you would all be co-present in a physical space, but we're stuck in this virtual space. But I would still like for us to feel co-present. So unless you have any strong reasons not to, I strongly invite you to turn your camera on because it creates a greater presence and feeling like we are actually all in this together rather than just a wall of names because that's less present, we'll just put it that way, unsatisfying. So good, lovely to see everybody's faces. I'm going to share my screen and so give me a second to push some buttons while I do that. That did not work. Hold on a second. Helps if I actually click the share button. All right, I'm just going to do one more quick setup here. I am going to be monitoring the chat on my other screen, the joys of two screens. So if at any time you have any questions, you are welcome to throw them into the chat window and I will attend to that a bit. I also have everybody's names up too. So you can also raise your hand. I do have some questions to ask as we go. So I don't want this to be entirely just me talking at you for an hour. We are going to do some breakout as well. I want you to spend a bit of time once I finish sharing with you some thoughts about social media and how to grow your public visibility and connections. I'd like you to break out, chat with each other a bit and think about your own motivations and goals for using social media as an academic. So let me start actually with a story. To the left is Katie Searles. Katie Searles is currently an associate professor at Louisiana State University. She is in the discipline of political science. Now, I know that this group here is STEM focused, and we recognize that in STEM, there is a majority of faculty who are men. Even in our doctoral program, some of them, the majority of doctoral students are men. Believe it or not, political science is also a male-dominated field, like philosophy, interestingly. Katie was a PhD student 8 years ago. And I met her actually through social media. So Katie, as a doctoral student, was attending the American Political Science Association annual conference. Those of you who've been in the academic space, you know about these academic conferences. You go and you attend panels. Political science has a problem of the manel. You've probably heard this phrase, the manel. These are male-dominated panels. And Katie and some of her fellow doctoral students, frankly, were kind of pissed about what they saw as this domination of senior men in spaces where we know there are also academic women, full professors, associate professors, doing the same kind of research who are not being invited to participate on these manels. So, and to the right is an example actually of a Brookings Institute event. So it doesn't extend just to academic conferences, also the media and think tanks like Brookings Institute inviting basically only men to be experts in this space. And so Katie, as a doctoral student, took to social media and she began to, in again, collaboration with other women doctoral students, to highlight some of the challenges and the problems of these male-dominated panels and the recognition that we're pushing for the recognition that women also have contributions. And so she and, again, a group of other doctoral students and a few assistant professor women started this website, Women Also Know Stuff. And I do encourage you to take a look at it. It is only available to political scientists, but from an organizing point of view and a collaboration and collective point of view, it strikes me as a really great example of how it is that women, when they get together, can do things that promote and support each other in the service of helping sort of advance our presence, our voice, our visibility in our disciplines. So it's happening in political science. I challenge you, my STEM women, to think about doing similar sorts of efforts in your fields as well. But this, of course, is a conversation about social media. And part of what I want to highlight is Katie. Again, I'll mention again, she was a PhD student when she came into my social media awareness because she was very active on Twitter. There are a set of hashtags, and I'll talk more about them in a second, and a network and a community of scholars that she began directly talking with about some of these issues, including me. And so as part of the effort to make visible what she saw as this inequity of women's voices in political science on panels and things like that, she and her co-troublemakers, as part of launching Women Also Know Stuff, created a hashtag Women Also Know Stuff around conferences. So on the right-hand side, you'll see here, there's a picture of the University of Arizona's public policy director, Brent Millward, receiving a sticker that they handed out at the conference, and then sort of celebrating his, support of Women Also Know Stuff, but also really using humor and engaging in a light and plainful way of highlighting what they saw, what Katie and her collaborators saw as a bit of an injustice. And so part of how and this was very much a social media driven organizing effort. So again, they created a hashtag, Women Also Know Stuff. They eventually created the website. They, at conferences, celebrated those who were with them, and then sometimes making some jokes about Manels. I didn't grab any of those screen captures, but there were a few of those, but not efforts necessarily to denigrate male colleagues, but sort of just to highlight the problem. And of course, because it's social media, lots of visuals, lots of memes. So Katie Searle, she rocks. Oh, there's my little thumb. So I highlight her as a starting place because she, again, doctoral student, I did not know who she was. She tweeted at me about some of these issues. I began to pay attention to her. She now is an associate professor. She's incredibly well known in the political science discipline, not only because she's a kick-ass scholar, and she is, but also because she really effectively used social media as a doctoral student, as a junior scholar, to raise a set of issues, but also to create a community. And that's what I want to highlight today. So I'm going to stop now. And before I talk with you about social media, I have a question for you guys, which is, why do you think as an academic you should be using social media? And you can type an answer in the chat, or you can raise your hand, or just speak. We're not that big a group. Either any of those pathways is fine, whatever feels comfortable. But again, why do you think as an academic you should be using social media? What do you think is the point of using social media as an academic woman in a STEM field? All right, conversation's coming fast and furious here. I have to make my window bigger so I can see all of the comments. Good. All right, so let me grab a couple here. So Subhastri said, connectivity, visibility, expanding your knowledge base. Mariah, connecting with a younger audience. Catherine, engage in real-time knowledge exchange and discussion. Good. Anya, connect with an audience, connect with, right? So I see a lot of connection with audiences. Ellen said, increase awareness about your work and making connections. That's a huge piece of this. That's awesome. Julia, finding out about opportunities and new research. That's great. Erin says, be entrepreneurial and spreading our ideas before or non-withstanding publication. Erin, say more about that, if you would.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so one of the things that I'm thinking of using, sorry, my son's in the background.
No worries.
One of the things that I'm planning to use it for is as a kind of a bypass to the publication process, because only certain things are funneled through that channel and certain ideas are, upheld or reified. So having a really grassroots place to actually just put that put an idea out there in the public marketplace and like get people's feedback or congregate with people, commune with people. I think it feels a little radical because things can be so precise in academia, but I know that's something that I'm hoping to do.
Good. That's great, Erin. Thanks. Catherine McDonald, I see you wrote increase impact of your research. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, so I'm interested in this conversation, not only for my own work, but also for that of my colleagues. And I think that, using social media gives you more of an opportunity to engage with a more diverse audience, right? So not just other scientists, but policymakers, lobbyists, activists, and, folks doing the work. And so it creates an opportunity to better connect your findings to potential change in policy and practice.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Oduduwabasi, I hope I have said your name correctly. Please let me know if that was not quite right. You wrote to inform people about topics that you're more educated about. I'd love to hear you say a bit more on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if people who are more educated than the average person are able, maybe because they like majored in that stuff, if they're able to communicate their views on particular opinions, it helps to reduce the amount of myths that go around. And so we're able to like enrich ourselves and better our activities and the way we view particular opinions.
Awesome. That's exactly right. I completely agree. And Sucheta, you wrote that women in your country have a lot to say, but don't because they have fear, and that you'd love to use social media to make them aware that they're not alone and that we women stand in solidarity. I think that's awesome. And that's part of what I was trying to highlight with Katie's story is she was trying to highlight that women in political science of all disciplines are tired of being sort of put on the sidelines, and that there is a solidarity among women, especially junior women academics, to see the trouble and highlight it and do something about it. Sucheta, do you want to add anything else?
Yes, I come from industry and I was basically into investment banking. I have seen female colleagues, my friends who were working with me, they had a lot to say because investment banking was primarily male dominated, but we could not. So I use social media to make them aware that, okay, we have opinion and it matters, and that is why I use it. My opinions are not really restricted to academia, it also extends to industry, and I'm just using my experience and my network to kind of disseminated.
Yeah, that's good. Awesome. All right, so let me thank you all for the thoughts and the rationale. I note, and I was really happy to see an emphasis on community, and I think that's one thing that is really important. I know that some of you are here because you're thinking, well, I'm going to need to use social media to promote my work. And that feels so icky because I don't like talking about myself or sort of bragging about myself, because that's what it feels like the self-promotional work. But I really want you to think about that the reason to use social media is to find kindred spirits, to find people who share your passions, who share your interests, who are part of, we tend to use community a lot. And in academia, there are many different communities that you potentially both are a member of or want to become a member of. So I kind of like the term kindred spirits, finding those who share your passions and knowledge, or who would benefit from your passions and from your knowledge. That's why you use social media. So it's about connection and community building and conversation, not so much promotion and I don't know, that kind of celebrity, right? Because that often gets associated with social media. But if you can put aside those pressures about celebrity and performance and promotion and think about it as conversation and community, maybe it's not quite as intimidating or scary and not as daunting. Another advantage of social media is commingling remotely. So, again, we're especially stuck in that reality currently with our digital media lives. But, conferences are still happening. Events, eventually at some point we will travel again. Even when we do travel, it still can be hard to get to all these different events. And being able to participate remotely in conversations around conferences and events is from my perspective, actually a very beneficial aspect of social media. And, you get social support. So while there is this feeling of, again, promotion, the research is clear that one of the primary reasons why people use social media is because it allows us to get support when we need it, when we're down and frustrated, and to share with others the good things that are happening and get that collective joy, especially right now when we can't do it in person. And also relatedly, celebrating and amplifying your fellow travelers. And I'll talk more about this here in a moment, but part of the joy of social media is not only getting social support when you need it, but also supporting others. And that includes highlighting and celebrating their work and their scholarship, amplifying it and highlighting it. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So those are some of the reasons to use social media: connection and community. And finally, engaging in public scholarship. So that goes back, I think, something that you said, Sucheta, for example, that you have a couple of communities, not only the academic community, but potentially the banking community, and having them understand and think about and know about the research is important. And that's a kind of public scholarship that you get to do. You get to reach a broader audience on social media. So a couple of tips, things to get us started. In terms of using social media, I strongly encourage you to ask questions to start discussions. So if you're really not sure how to get started, you've jumped onto Twitter for the first time, start asking questions and see who answers, and then talk with them. Share news about your show, share news about your community, update them on events, on activities. You've just attended this event. You can go and tweet or post on Facebook or on Instagram that you just learned a little bit about how to more effectively use social media, and share a tip about one thing you learned that would be beneficial to your community to know about how better to use social media. If you are going to talk about your scholarship or your dissertation or the work you're working on, it is often the case I'll see my colleagues posting a title and maybe a link to the publisher when they get a journal article published. But what's better is actually to say why it matters. What's the one key takeaway, the one thing that you want everybody to know about that scholarship? Because that's actually what's going to be useful to them, not the fact that you publish something, right? You're not giving anybody anything by saying, hey, I just published this new article. But you give people something when you say, it turns out that when people actively use social media positively, that in turn gives them positive satisfaction. That's true, by the way. It also is a good idea to drive people somewhere. So you should be thinking about, and it sounds like you'll get a chance to hear more about that at the next presentation, but you might want to set up a blog or a website where you're keeping your thoughts, links to your articles, those kinds of things, driving people back to your website. If you search Kathleen Searle's, she has a blog, for example, and of course I have an academic web page. Those kinds of things can be useful, and I'll talk about LinkedIn as well in a moment. When you do create your social media accounts, wherever those might be, and I'll talk about a couple of key ones in a moment, make sure that your biographical statement really highlights a few key aspects about you that you want people to know. And then I guess the last is be kind, celebrate others, because again, it's about collectivity and connection. And so it's not so much about promoting yourself, but being kind and celebrating and honoring the work of others. To the extent that you want to do public scholarship, it can be beneficial to follow journalists, especially on Twitter. And I'll give you a couple of tips about that in a second. So here I'm going to share with you a couple of bios. Mine is on the left. These are both Twitter. I just grabbed a couple of Twitter bios, in part because they have to be really short. So there is a bit of an art to how you construct a bio. I have highlighted that I'm a professor at Syracuse, that I have written a book. I have a link to the book. I have a research account to another for my research project. That research project has a Twitter account, so I've linked to that as well. And I highlight the fact that I'm a former president of an academic association. I want to highlight Robin here on the right. Robin's in my network. I've never met her. She follows me on Twitter. I actually don't follow her on Twitter, but she reacted to a conversation that I posted yesterday, which I'll show in a second. One of the things I want to highlight is she is ABD, so she is working on her dissertation right now at Rutgers. Notice how many more followers she has than I do. I have 2,600 followers. She has 4,500 other followers. And I just want to highlight that, you know, there's often, I think, a perception that only I don't know, more seasoned, established scholars have the bigger network, the bigger following, and that is honestly actually not the case. Although I've been on Twitter since 2008, I actually didn't heavily use my Twitter account until just a couple of years ago. So I am behind the curve, but she's done a beautiful job of highlighting. Again, she's ABD, she's still getting started as a junior scholar, but she's linking to and connecting with some of the different organizations that are part of her identity. And she's got a link to Data and Society. So just the food for thought on the bio. Okay, so I'm now going to talk a little bit about some of the platforms, and I'm just going to highlight the kind of key ones. We can talk about some of the other ones, like say Snapchat. No, that's more a joke, but anyway, so Twitter, what's it good for? I think academics, we do tend to think of Twitter as sort of one of the go-to platforms. So I have to just highlight. So what I did yesterday in preparation for this, I went to Twitter and I tweeted to my followers. I said, so I'm giving this talk tomorrow. Any advice? And I've gotten over like 100 comments and recommendations, which was actually kind of fun. I heard, again, that's how I found some people that I didn't even know were following me, and got to hear from them, and I've had conversations with them and got some great advice, which I'm now going to share with you. So I mentioned, use Twitter to participate in events. Conferences often do have kind of live streamed hashtags. And so if there's a conference that you want to attend in the future, find out what the hashtags are that conference is using when it hosts, and follow along and see what the discussion is like and what people are talking about and who they're talking to. Because that can help you get a sense of the community, its network, the themes, and the scholarship that matters to them, and it can help you connect into that network. One of the nice things about Twitter is you can follow hashtags. There is a hashtag, in fact, in the center, in the top there's academic Twitter. That's a great hashtag to follow because there's a number of both humorous and fun, but also serious and useful conversations that happen on that hashtag. As I mentioned, in this conversation I posted yesterday about this question of using social media, I had a number of people comment, and I engage with them, and then even further in those discussions, engage with some of their followers. So to the extent that you want to grow your network on Twitter, talking with and engaging with followers of followers is actually a remarkably effective way to grow that network, that community of people. Talking with journalists, a large number of the people I follow on Twitter are actually journalists, and it allows me to then see what they're writing about. As a scholar I study social media. I also study politics, and it is beneficial for me to see what it is that the news media is currently worried about, because I want to help them understand and give solid, thoughtful, research-driven answers to challenging problems in society, like misinformation. And so being able to interact with journalists helps me to have that conversation, to do that public scholarship. There is a note of caution, and I'll talk about this at the end, which is that Twitter is very public. And I'll come back to that. Instagram. I personally do not use Instagram as a scholar. For me, my Instagram community are basically people that I follow who are basically friends. I do not use Instagram as an academic community building. For me, it's really about friends and family. But if you do use Instagram, and I recognize there are definitely scholars who are cultivating Instagram as a intellectual community, you know, the trick with Instagram is to have a short clip or a pic, and basically kind of especially on a narrow topic or set of topics. You know, Instagram is deeply visual. That's really the point of Instagram. And so you want to think about how it is that if you're going to engage with Instagram in an academic way, how do you engage with it visually? That's key. LinkedIn, you all should create a LinkedIn account. I highly recommend it. I actually really like LinkedIn as a way to connect with my students. So if you are currently teaching, almost all of your students are encouraged to create LinkedIn accounts because that's what's going to help them create that visibility when they go on the job market, etc. And more so than Twitter or any other platform I use, LinkedIn is the way I connect with my students. And I really love seeing where they go and what they do. And there is another kind of impact that we have with our students, right? I know we're talking about academia and research, blah, 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 but teaching is a critical part of what we do as well. And connecting with our students and supporting them and their endeavors, I find LinkedIn a great tool for that. It also is a great way to reach past academia to business and philanthropic organizations and non-governmental organizations, because they all live on LinkedIn. And so posting events and sharing and highlighting your research actually on LinkedIn. So I've gotten in the habit now when I publish articles of creating small summaries of the findings and posting it on LinkedIn. And I find I get an entirely different community of people engaging with that scholarship and finding it helpful, which again, at the end of the day, I want to produce research that's helpful to others. Interestingly, I discovered that you can use LinkedIn as a resume tool. So let me show you. So when you fill in your LinkedIn profile, there is a place where you can go on the More button and create a PDF. And the PDF is actually a resume. Fun fact, I didn't know this, thought I would share that with you. All right, now Facebook. If you are a PhD student, actually, I'm kind of curious, as doc students, are any of you on Facebook? You can type yes or no. Ani is on Facebook. I saw Sucheta raise her hand. Nina is not. Ellen deactivated it. Oh, but most of you are. Okay, interestingly, you know, Facebook is definitely, if you talk to our undergraduates, they're not using Facebook that much. They might have an account, but they're not actively using it. And Facebook, I personally use Facebook, again, more as a way to connect with friends and family. However, I have, because I'm old, and I was on Facebook in 2006, I think is when I got my account when I was a faculty member at the University of Albany. In the early days for me of Facebook, this is how I connected with other academics. I made a rule, and you might want to think about this, kind of which platforms you want to be big and public and connect to anybody kind of promiscuously, if you will, versus social media platforms where it's a bit more intimate or closed environment. I am not friends with anybody on Facebook that I haven't actually met. And I also have a private Facebook account. So if you Google me, you might see, it'll take some pages, but you will eventually find my Facebook account. It's just a photo and a little bit of information about me. I have closed my Facebook account. It is private. And we'll talk about that in a second. You can also create private Twitter accounts. And we can talk about some of the pros and cons of that. Because of the affordances of Twitter, it is so public. And that's kind of how it works best, is as a public, anybody links to anybody kind of platform. Facebook for me works better as I know you, you know me, and I will share more about myself on Facebook. That's kind of my protected network. If you use Facebook, and this is what I tend to use Facebook for, is really for social support. So when I'm having a crummy day, which happens at least once a week, being able to go to Facebook and just post that, you know, today was a crummy day, and get a little bit of boost and guidance. Often I ask for advice on Facebook. Personal family stuff advice, sometimes academic stuff, but it's really about social support. It's worth noting, however, even if you don't use Facebook much for your own personal use, a lot of organizations, academic organizations that you are connected to or want to be connected to have Facebook groups. So on the bottom there, that's the Association of Internet Researchers, the organization I was president of. They have a Facebook group. They have 4,000 people on that Facebook group. And there's a lot of posting and conversation happening though there. So even if you're not using Facebook, you might still want to connect to some of the groups that you want to connect with on Facebook. And if you really do want to network with old academic types like me, we still live on Facebook. So worth keeping that in mind as well. All right, and then a few last things, other outlets. So there are email lists. On the bottom of your screen in the center there is the AIR-L, because again, it's the Association of Internet Researchers, my organization, so I have to highlight it. AIR has a list of over 7,000 people on that email list. Email lists still exist, they're still used. There's also Google Groups, which is basically another way to do email lists, but there are lots of different Google Groups. Academics do Google Groups too. And there are blogs, and you might want to think about doing some blogging or starting a blog or creating a kind of a site where you get to connect and communicate with others. Those are other ways to connect. Because honestly, you don't have to do social media. And that's one thing I want to highlight. While we're here to talk about the glories and benefits of using social, you don't have to. And I have a whole set of academic friends who are never on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or anything else, but they are good scholars, they are at conferences, they participate in some of these email lists, and they're still visible. So there are mechanisms and ways of engaging with your scholarly community that don't require you to use social media. So you have to make some choices for yourself about what you want to do, why you want to do it. All right, I'm just going to finish with some caution. One thing to acknowledge is that, and I live this, when you use social media, and there's good research that supports this, it activates imposter syndrome, or specifically the theory of social comparison. When you're on, so for me, when I'm on Twitter, one of the people I got my PhD is Dana Goldthwaite Young. Dana Young she graduated 2 years after me, and she's at the University of Delaware in a communication department. She wrote a book a couple of years ago called Irony and Outrage about the sort of the toxic communication media environment we have, both in terms of talk shows and infotainment, as well as social media. She has rocketed over the last year to being a public scholar. So she's been on CNN and she was on Good Morning America. She has 16,000 followers. Whenever I go on Twitter and I see her, honestly, I do social comparison and I get jealous because I want to be doing that stuff. But I only have 2,000 followers, and I'm not on Good Morning America, and I'm not on CNN. And that's just the reality, friends. There are going to be people in your community that just do the things you want to be able to do. And when you go on social media, it sort of punches you in the face, that reality that you're not doing the things that all these other cool people are doing. So you have to acknowledge that, and you have to grapple with it and make some choices about how you want to deal with it. For me, honestly, sometimes I avoid Twitter for a while until I'm feeling in a better space. Then I jump back on Twitter and connect with people. Because again, it's not about promotion, it's about connection. And so once I get past I'm not promoting myself enough, to just think about why I want to talk with people on Twitter, then I feel better and I get over it. But that's the thing. There is absolutely harassment and toxicity. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but 2 years ago, I was the subject of a major Twitter dogpile. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my adult life. A week of just absolute filth being lobbied at me on Twitter from the alt-right. And it's unpleasant. And part of the problem is that what you post on Twitter is very hard to delete. as I mentioned, I've been on Twitter since 2008. As a result, I have a long history of posts on Twitter, and it is not easy to delete that history. So you need to think about what you want to be living on the internet long past when you might be even paying attention, but other people might be. So think about that visibility, that publicness, and really make sure you want that stuff living out there. If you don't, create a private account or switch to different platforms where you can be more private and not have that kind of public visibility. So yeah, there is dysfunctionality when you're using social media, and it's something that you really, really need to be thinking about and conscientious of in this space. And as I said from the last slide, there are other ways to connect. You do not have to use social media to be an active, publicly engaged, visible scholar doing meaningful work and connecting to your community. I have a couple of citations, and maybe Amanda, we can share these out with the group afterwards if that's useful, of a couple of articles dealing with, again, because we're researchers and academics, a couple of tips and tricks about how to navigate both the positives of social media as well as the negatives. And so with that, I'll pause and see if there are any questions. I see Anya says, I've got 6 Instagram accounts. A lot of you do have multiple accounts, and that is actually a great way to navigate some of this. I don't. I have one account on each platform because I can't manage them all. But you can create sort of your private accounts and your public accounts as a way to navigate some of the challenges. Any questions, any comments on this before I get you into a breakout group?
I have a quick question, if you don't mind me just
Please.
jumping on audio. So can you speak, so you mentioned the thing about knowing what we're getting into in terms of the toxicity and things being really public. So I know as a woman, one of the things that I've worked on is a resistance to visibility and kind of taking up space. Can you speak to, either from your perspective personally or as a scholar or public figure, how do you negotiate between wanting to grow and push yourself and kind of take on more of a leadership voice or a public voice versus protecting yourself and not wanting to be harassed by the alt-right, yeah, Freudian slip, alt-right on Twitter?
Yeah, it's a great question, Erin. I guess the way I navigate it is, especially with Twitter, I try to be very conscientious. I mentioned Dana Young. So Dana is very public and very visible and very personal on Twitter. And her husband died, oh gosh, almost 8 years ago now, of a brain tumor. And she fell into conspiracy thinking following his death. And so she has been very vocal and visible on Twitter about her personal pains around her experiences with her husband's death and you know, again, her own flirtations with conspiracist ideation, etc. I'll tell you guys something. So today is the 20th anniversary of the day I defended my dissertation proposal. So 20 years ago today, I defended my dissertation proposal. I know, isn't that weird? It's also the day I flew to Phoenix, Arizona to visit my mom, who was in the hospital dying of liver cancer because she's an alcoholic. I am never posting that on Twitter. Of course, this is now on a video recording. Anyway, right, but so there are just, I'm never going to post that stuff on Twitter. I don't really want the world to know some of those pains. I might post it to my Facebook group. I was actually mulling doing so today. Because it gives me a chance to reflect and talk a little bit about it with others and get some social support and connection. And also to let people know that, you know, just because I have a PhD doesn't mean I don't have really complicated background. And all of us have complicated backgrounds and challenges that we face. We're not alone in those challenges. And letting other people know that if you've had really weird childhoods, it's okay. We get through these things, but I'm never posting that on Twitter. Too public, too visible. I don't want it used against me at some point in the future. So it's about choice. You know, again, I think really actively thinking through who is the audience that you're talking to and why. That's, I think, a really, really key piece. And I'm very cognizant on Twitter that that's a public audience. I don't know who all is following me at all. And so for that reason, I'm a bit more closed about my personal experiences, but I'm quite happy to share my political perspectives as well as my feelings around social injustice. I don't have any concerns about posting that stuff on Twitter. Subhasri?
So I had a question about, how we should manage our social media space, especially given that we are more junior scholars. So as in my case, I often like to advocate and, join certain social media campaigns out there, especially on Twitter, writing something, posting something, but it is not really related to my academics. So my question is that, should we be doing it through one account or should we try to separate? I really want to keep it one account, but sometimes I feel like maybe this is not what I should do, given that I am a junior scholar still working on my PhD. So that was my
Yeah, thanks, Subhasri. Yeah, it's a great question. And Mariah, I saw your private chat and I see you. Good. I'm glad you shared this with the public group. Private Twitter account for undergrad that you're using infrequently, and should you start fresh with a professional, kind of a professional account, professional setting? Again, I think for each of you, you're going to have to make that decision for yourself and what you feel comfortable with. Again, it is hard to get rid of history on any of these social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They don't make it easy to get rid of old stuff. There are ways to do it, and you can Google and find some tips, but it's not easy and it takes time. And so sometimes it is better just to basically say, I've got my personal private account and I will keep that with a closed network of people I know. And then I'll have my public account where I'm not sort of curating the the audience and just sort of growing that I don't know, that more public connection, that public network. If you care about follower counts, if you fragment yourself, it's harder then to grow that follower count, but you shouldn't be using social media for that purpose. It's about making those connections and talking to audiences. So I don't have a good answer, unfortunately. It's going to be, I think, up to each of you, how you want to use your social media accounts, who you want to connect with, what the motivations and goals are. And so I think with that, what I would like to do, and maybe Amanda, you can help us, is I'd like to actually send you guys to a breakout group. I'm going to ask you to have a bit of a chat with each other, a quick introduction, and then I want you to talk with each other about the goals you have for using social media and why. And think again about audiences, or where are your kindred souls online? Which social media platforms make sense, where they live? And again, it's not about the platform. It's about where do the people that you want to talk to, connect with, and commune with, where do they live? Which social media, platforms are they using to connect? Because that's really what it's about. It's not about the platform per se, it's about the people. Where do they live? How can you talk to them? And then once we finish the session, what's one thing you're going to do following up on this? So I'll post that in the chat so you guys have access to it, but that's what I'd like to have you do in breakout for let's say 7 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and do a debrief. All right, welcome back, everybody. I know that was probably, for some of you, may not have been quite enough time, but hopefully this at least gave you some chance to think a little bit and talk about some of the goals. So let's debrief a bit. So anybody want to share with me what, for you, are some of the goals that you have for using social media and why? Who would like to share?
I think I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Subhasri.
So I think the first thing that comes to my mind is I have different goals for different platforms. So for me, Facebook is very community centric, and it is very, very very personalized, very something that's, I really, the audience is something where I'm very selective about. Whereas when I'm on Twitter, it's more of expanding my knowledge base. So I joined Twitter to find historians, basically, that I read about and that I know about. And that led me to academia, and that, it made my Twitter grow and develop a new sort of objective for me, which is basically to see what people are doing and find the things that really connect with me, that I like, but may not have really access to within, my professional sphere as it exists. So just expand the horizons of visibility and knowledge. And LinkedIn for me is the standard, standard professional profile. That's pretty much my ecosystem that I use and the different motives that I have.
No, that is awesome, Savasri. Thank you. Perfect. Anybody else want to share goals? Goals and platforms, goals and people, really, through platform. Yeah, Sucheta, go ahead.
So I use LinkedIn as I was talking to the participants in the breakout room, that I use it to keep in touch with my ex-colleagues who are part of the industry, and I also use LinkedIn to find participants for my research project. So fortunately, the project that I was doing with Professor Jeff Searle, I really did not have any difficulty getting participants because I was pretty active on LinkedIn. So in terms of that, I would say that LinkedIn is really, really good. Also, if you are looking out for internship opportunities, it's a good way to look out or to search those opportunities, because you would find a dedicated place where you can search for all those specific job opportunities that align with your interest, and you can do that. When it comes to Twitter, I keep it only for academic purposes, and I also kind of share the events, the social events and the academic events through that platform. Facebook, I would say that my interest has now changed. When I was in industry, it was more very informal, very casual, but I no more keep it casual. I would say that it is now a platform that helps me share my opinions that I did not when I was in industry. So I would say that it's a place where I found my own freedom. It's a newfound freedom after I have joined academia. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. That's fantastic. Isabel, I saw you posted. Do you want to announce that? Because I think that's important.
Yeah, so we were just chatting in our group, and we think, a lot of us might not have a lot of followers, but we have a great community here just with the WiSE members. So if you're interested in following each other, we can just post our handles and just start building community that way, because we typically come to these events, but we can come together on social media as well. So I can post my handle and others can share as well.
That's a great idea, Isabel. And I think that's such a smart, and I think that's a great place to end is, right, remember, social media is about finding your tribe, the people that you want to connect with, to communicate with, to share resources and ideas and social support. And so doing things like sharing each other's and following each other on these different platforms and building that community, that's how it works. That's how it works when you go to conferences. It's how it works within your cohorts of your doctoral programs or among us professors. So, reach out and engage. One thing I've gotten in the habit of doing more recently is actually when I interact with people, I then try to follow them on LinkedIn, which is new for me. But there are some interesting affordances of LinkedIn that I hadn't paid as much attention to in the past. So, it's same with Twitter. Both of those are kind of my go find those people and connect with them. So I think with that, we're out of time. I really enjoyed the conversation with you. If you have any questions or would like any follow-up advice, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm really easy to find. I'm the only Stormer Galley besides my husband and my 3 daughters. So you can Google me or go to my website, or you can find me on Twitter. Thanks so much, Amanda, for the host and the opportunity to talk with you guys. It's a pleasure.
I can't thank you enough. This has been terrific. I think we packed a lot into this hour, lots of great discussion and engagement. Thank you all for asking these great questions and sharing and chatting. Terrific. I know I took away a lot of things for social media myself, so I'm sure all of you did as well. So thank you. I did post the evaluation link in the chat, and I'll follow up with an email with that information. Again, we're going to have the recording. We're going to have the slides. I'm also happy to capture these wonderful all of these wonderful Twitter accounts. What else? Mostly Twitter, I think. I'm happy to capture those and put those in the email as well to all of you, because I know we'll be ending the meeting here shortly and you may not have an opportunity to capture all of those. So anything else? Any other questions or thoughts before we say so long? And I wish you all a wonderful weekend.
This is Lisa. I just wanted to say, and it's in the chat, but we should probably create a LinkedIn group specifically for this group that we can start, and you'd be amazed at how that group can grow on LinkedIn. So I don't know if I can do it, but I'm sure you probably have to do it, Amanda, not me.
Well, actually, Isabel does a wonderful job managing our WiSE account. So we have a Twitter account, LinkedIn account, we have
good.
Facebook account. So I'm happy to push that information out as well. And let's connect with those accounts we already have. That would be fantastic. Thank you for raising that, Lisette. Appreciate it.
You.
All right, everybody. Thank you again. Have a terrific weekend. Bye-bye.
Stay warm.
Thank you.